Many of my guests have talked about tuning into and pursuing your passion when considering career options. In this episode, I talked with Mariana Vargas-Caballero about how she discovered her passion for science and about the choices and principles that brought her into the academic life.
I remember working through a really fun, really nice book called Build Your Own Rainbow. And it had so many nice exercises that allowed me to reflect. For example, it had one about drawing your lifeline and thinking at which points in your life you have felt the most accomplished, stressed, happy, and so on. And also kind of doing mind maps of your life and career and seeing patterns of what makes you satisfied, dissatisfied, and so on. So together with that, I realized that, I value knowledge and understanding as a part of my job. And so I knew I really, really wanted that. And at the same time, I wanted to have, discovery, understanding, and this communication with the new generations. So that kind of put it all in perspective for me. And I said, I know that it's going to be very hard, but I believe that an academic job is going to be right for me.
Welcome to Papa Ph.D. with David Mendez, the podcast where we explore careers and life after grad school with guests who have walked the road less traveled and have unique stories to tell about how they made their place in a world of constantly evolving rules. Get ready to go off the beaten path and hop on for an exciting new episode of Papa Ph.D.
Welcome to this week's episode of Papa PhD. This week I have with me Dr. Mariana Vargas-Caballero. Mariana is a Mexican-British neuroscientist. She obtained a degree in biology in Mexico. She then trained for a PhD in neuroscience at the University of Cambridge. With fellowship funding from Wellcome Trust, she obtained postdoctoral training at the University of California at Berkeley, the University of Toronto, and the University of Oxford. In 2012, Mariana established her independent research group at the University of Southampton, where she's a lecturer in neuroscience. Her research interests focus on understanding how brain circuits are affected by dementia. Welcome to Papa PhD, Mariana.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It's a real privilege to be here. I believe that we need more voices from academia to tell our stories, and the more diverse, the better. So in a way, also, this feels a bit like a celebration for me, looking back, reflecting all the challenges that I have overcome. So I'm really excited about our conversation.
Yeah, I'm really excited too. We've talked, before the actual recording, and I really like your story, and I really like also to have you as someone who's still in academia, talking about how what different factors affected your journey throughout, brought you to where you are today, and then also to look at your interaction with students today. Because in a way, Papa PhD, when I do the podcast, I always envision someone that I'm talking to, and it's students, it's PhD researchers. So I think, and I hope that we'll be able to also talk a little bit of what you went through and maybe what you're seeing today in the students you interact with. So yeah. Welcome. Really happy to have you here. And to begin, I think it's only natural to start by the beginning and to talk about your academic journey, how it started, maybe what motivated it, and then we'll talk about the different things that happened along the way that I feel the audience will really appreciate learning.
Absolutely. So in terms of how it all started, I would say that I fell in love with natural sciences from when I was like 8, 9, 10 years old. And I loved everything to do with the way that plants, animals, organism worked. And I remember looking through the microscope for the first time. They had asked us to go to a graveyard and get some of the dirty water from from the flowers that people leave, so that we could bring some really good microorganisms. And I just fell in love with cells from that moment. So I kept studying, and then in one visit that we did from my university to the National University of Mexico, I visited the Institute for Cellular Physiology. And for the first time, I heard a lot about neurons, ultrastructure, electrophysiology. All of those concepts just blew my mind. And I knew first that I wanted to do my final year project on a neuroscience topic. And then I knew I wanted to do a PhD and stay in academia.
Mm-hmm. And so how was that process? Did you go through a master's first?
Yes, I did. So I did in Mexico, your undergraduate is about 4.5 years. Then you need to do a project, which is very long and it's of undefined length, at least back then, that's how it was. And that's not very helpful because it really is up to your supervisor to decide when it's finished. But so I did my project, and after that, I applied to the University of Cambridge, originally with a 1-year scholarship that I won, and that was a master. And once I was at the university, I gained another scholarship to have the rest of the time for a PhD.
Okay. It's the structure that you mentioned resembles what it was in Portugal when I did my bachelor's. It was 5 years, and in the last year I also had a project, and now it's actually they made it equivalent to a master's. There was this Bologna agreement that for anyone who was in that structure, gained this equivalency to a master's degree.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Two sides of the pond and the same model.
Yeah, similar structure. I like that concept because I think it gives that value to the experimental work, the hands-on science, and to earn that person a master's is quite positive.
Mm-hmm. And the fact of having a final project or the fact of doing a master's before a PhD may help you understand whether you like research at all, whether it's something that the whole process of research is something that you like, and it may help you in decide if you want to take the step into a PhD, I believe.
Exactly. And you go in with a lot more information.
So you went to Cambridge. So this was a huge change for you, I imagine. A culture clash, I imagine also. Can you talk a little bit about how it was to, look at your colleagues, look at your family, and say, "Hey, I'm going to Europe. I'm going to a great place, and it's a great opportunity, but it's far, far away."
Yes, no, it was quite shocking. But what I remember was a day in which, after a lecture, one of my lecturers called me to her office and said, "Have you considered going to Cambridge?" She had been in Cambridge herself. And that really shocked me because I knew I wanted to do a postgraduate degree abroad. And when she said Cambridge, I thought, really? That really is a big, big shot. But because she had that experience, she had seen it and she had seen my work. And she said, "I can give you a very good reference letter." So I started, I set everything in motion. And that day when I told my family, they seemed really shocked that I wanted to do that. But, my family has always supported me. And, some months down the line, I was there in the airport and everybody was extremely supportive. I did feel, that I was leaving everything I had. But once I got to the UK, it was so much fun. It was so nice. Everybody was very welcoming and also quite diverse. I was always thinking that, I'm going to be surrounded by people speaking English. But it turned out that in my lab, everybody was speaking German.
Oh, wow.
So it was just really multicultural. And I made friends really, really quickly. It was wonderful.
And apparently, from what I understand, people were very welcoming when you arrived. Was there any sort of adjustment, even though your colleagues and the lab environment was very inviting and welcoming, like you said? What about the other aspects of being in a new country, different food, different habits? How was this experience of teletransport yourself into quite a different daily reality? Let's say.
When I look back, I always remember those times with so much, I felt so accomplished and so happy. I remember thinking, when I just left Mexico, I had really no money whatsoever. I had to borrow money to pay for my English exams and things like that. So when I suddenly was in England and I had my accommodation and I had my payment, I think I'm being paid for studying. And, I felt safe. I was, back then there was no Skype or Zoom. And so I was in touch with my family via telephone calls, which were extremely expensive, or letters. My mom used to write me letters. So,
oh, wow.
But all of that just felt so complete. It was all happy. I don't seem, and of course I missed my family, etc. But those moments of interaction when we had telephone calls and so on, just made it all very good. And because I formed a really good support bubble in the UK when I got there, they have this system with the colleges where you have, so you have your accommodation, your college, and you meet people who are outside your lab instantly. And so they kind of give you that bubble of independent from your day-to-day lab work. And it was good.
Sounds like a really good system. And I do agree that, and I mention it a lot, listeners or people who follow me, they've heard about it a lot. The importance of having a community outside of your research and outside of your lab. And it seems that the college structure made it happen organically. So I'm really curious. I've never been, and I've never experienced that and that model. But it seems from what you're saying that it was really, really helpful.
Yeah.
Now, going through your PhD, how did things go? And you're now a professor. How did the PhD go? And how did you, let's say, align yourself and project yourself into the future as you were going, year by year through your PhD?
Yes. So my PhD went well. Something to mention is that I did have a bit of stress throughout because I was supposed to do a set of experiments that were very challenging technically. And so I had to, it was all very intricate, very challenging. And I went for months and months without results. And so that really kind of built up certain stress. But I remember my supervisor always had a really good outlook on everything. I remember one day when he said something that made everybody laugh in the lab. And he said, well, your exam is coming up and you only have, one set of results. Should we start simulating something? Should we start some simulations so that you have some more data? And we all laughed, and we did. We simulated some stuff. But that also gave me a new set of skills, which was, use MATLAB, use these models of neurons to build that type of simulations. And so in the end, then my PhD continued and the acquisition of data was extremely slow. However, it did give me in the end a set of results that added something new to the field, and therefore it allowed me to gain a PhD.
And so you mentioned hitting some difficulty in getting data out and in making things work at a certain pace. And I, from what I know, in England, it's the time to do a PhD is quite short, 3 years. I don't know if it was the case for you.
Yes. So when I first got to Cambridge, I had 1 year for the master's, and my project kind of evolved into the PhD. So I would say that in total, for that set of discoveries, I had 4 years. So that was a bit of an advantage. But even if you look at 4 years, it's still not the 5 or 6 or 7 that you get in the US. It's very limited by the funding. So you just get the funding for that period of time. And if you have no means to continue, then you need to make sure that you finish with it within that time.
Mm-hmm. And no, I understand. But where I was going with this was knowing that you had this limited time, seeing that things were not maybe going at the speed that you would have liked. What was the main attitude or principle that kind of helped you day by day keep going at it and make sure that you were building that project brick by brick and then and getting to the finished product?
Yes. So I think that one strategy that I use nowadays, and I use it quite consciously, is to break big problems into smaller ones. And back then I did it a bit more organically, or probably that's what my supervisor was, feeding me one problem at a time. And so I first conquered some problems, and they looked really difficult at the time. But once we sorted them, then we were able to go to the more difficult ones and so on. And towards the end of my PhD, I was doing some experiments that were technically challenging, extremely technically challenging, but they were successful and they demonstrated the principle that we were after.
And now thinking of what came next. So you ended up getting your data, doing your defense and getting your PhD, like you said. Tell us just about what were the next steps? What were the questions that you asked yourself about going, what path you were going to follow into the academic career, let's say?
Yes. So at the beginning, when I first finished my PhD, I wanted to travel again. So during my PhD, I met my boyfriend, now husband, who wanted to go to do a PhD to Toronto. And so I applied in various places, and I gained fellowship to go to California and then Toronto. That first step that I took from PhD to postdoc was a bit more kind of automatic. I knew I had to do a postdoc. It was kind of, this is what I need to do next, without giving it that thought, or what is this leading me into right now? But once I was in that process of working California, Toronto, 2 years into it, I started to question, is this really what I want? I'm going onto this academic path. Do I want to continue with it? And I was very aware of how highly competitive academia is. So now we know that 1 in 20 PhD students is going to get a tenure track position, and 1 in 200 is going to get a full professorship. So I saw this as a very, very challenging job prospect that I was aiming at. However, in that time, especially once I was in Toronto and I had reunited with my other half, I took that time to reflect. And I remember working through a really fun, really nice book called Build Your Own Rainbow. And it had so many nice exercises that allowed me to reflect. For example, it had one about drawing your lifeline and thinking at which points in your life you have felt the most accomplished, stressed, happy, and so on. And also kind of doing mind maps of your life and career and seeing patterns of what makes you satisfied, dissatisfied, and so on. So together with that, I realized that, I value knowledge and understanding as a part of my job. And so I knew I really, really wanted that. And at the same time, I wanted to have, discovery, understanding, and this communication with the new generations. So even though that kind of put it all in perspective for me, and I said, I know that it's going to be very hard, but I believe that an academic job is going to be right for me. So I'm going to give it my all. I'm going to go for it. And I'm aware that if I'm not one of those people who gets that tenure track position, then I can do something else. I have skills and I can use them for something else. But for now, this is plan A, and I'm just going to go for it full on. And I did that. So I kept going, and then I applied for the following fellowship when the time came.
That sounds really interesting, because one of the key things when we talk about figuring out your career path, taking decisions like this, is introspection, kind of a self-inquiry. And it looks like naturally you gravitated towards that. You found this book and you did the work, and you actually ended up with an answer, which a lot of us might not, either have anyone suggest this book to us or a book or a seminar or something that kind of opens that window and makes us start to think, look inside and think, okay, let's take a pause. My experiments are, I'll pick them up tomorrow, but today I'm going to look at me. What are my strengths? What are my, my strong suits? What are my, special skills that are particular to me? Starting to do all that work of looking at yourself to then be able to project yourself into the future. And I think it's really interesting that you ended up on your own, kind of following the right path, which is to first look inside to then see what you can be and what you can aim to be outside.
Yep.
And so so now you were in Toronto with your partner. What came next? After this year in Toronto?
Yes, so that was quite an interesting time because that's when you start feeling that pressure of where are we going with our careers, and that combined with the fixed term contracts, it kind of adds that, we have this upcoming ending of our contract in 2 years or in 3 years. And then, you're going to have to be thinking of your next move, not by the end of it, but a year before or sometimes earlier. So we started thinking of many different options. And essentially, our philosophy was apply to everything that you would be prepared to accept. Okay. And then the more options, the better. So we applied to many, many things. And I think the solution, something that worked really, really well for us, was that we both gained fellowships. Fellowships, at least in the UK, allow you to, because the fellowship is yours, allow you to relocate. And that was the key for us to be able to sort this two-body problem. The problem of having two academics who both need a job in hopefully the same place.
Yeah.
So I remember at some point we had offers in two different places, but one of them did not involve a fellowship. And so it was essentially bound to that place. And the other place involved, two fellowships, which meant that eventually we could take that flexibility of relocating one when the time came. And so that's how we arrived in Oxford.
So just a question, just so I understand, was your partner now done with his PhD, or this was he still doing his PhD?
So he was done with his PhD. He was kind of 1 year ahead of me, and so he was also looking for the next stage, like a tenure track or a fellowship or something. And so he gained a fellowship from the Royal Society in the UK, which is 5 years to start with. And so it was originally attached to the University of Oxford, but then there is this system that you can extend it. And that's, in a way, that's what allowed him to come to Southampton eventually with me.
That's interesting. And just so, again, someone who's out there listening and who thinks, doing their postdoc and thinking, I could kind of follow Mariana's path. Can you describe a little bit what type of position you landed? What, when you arrived, what was your job in Oxford?
In Oxford. So in Oxford,
precisely.
I came back. So when I finished my PhD, I gained a Wellcome Traveling Fellowship, which allowed me to be in California, Toronto, and then 1 year back in the UK when I chose Oxford. And once in Oxford, I gained another fellowship, again from the Wellcome Trust, which it was called a Training Oxion Fellowship, which allowed me to gain extra skills. And so they were all, advertised through the normal channels, Job AC UK. And then when my fellowship in Oxion finished, I was able then to apply for a tenure track that was offered at the University of Southampton. Okay,
and that's where you are today.
Yeah.
When Mariana said this, I found it almost intriguing, but really interesting, that she was mentioning that as a candidate for an academic position at the stage that she was, getting training on specific skills was key to being the right candidate, fulfilling the requirements to land an academic position. So I asked her to share more details about this training and about what advantage this brought her as a candidate. So you're talking about training, and you're quite skilled coming out of the journey that you said, and including California, including Toronto. It makes me curious, but I think also it's going to be useful. What were you then focused on learning to prepare yourself to land this position that you had set your mind to?
Yes. So the reality is, and it's something that I discuss often with my students, is to land these positions, funnily enough, what you need, rather than, you need the skills, but you need papers. You need to have demonstrated with publications that you can push those skills to fill in gaps in knowledge. And so the skills that I have are in the area of electrophysiology, and also those extra trainings that I have had have allowed me to implement techniques in molecular biology or behavioral analysis to ask questions related to dementia or memory. And so essentially, it's the combination of those papers and those skills that I think put me in a really good position when I applied for this job, both of those things.
And you had mentioned off the mic spending time, some time in a residential course to hone those skills. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So absolutely. I think that course was very important for me because I knew about it since I was in my undergraduate project. So it's a course, it is very famous. It's in Woods Hole in the USA, and it's called neurobiology, and it's essentially 2 months residential, super intense course. Researchers from all over the world come, and essentially they bring their labs to teach a very small group of students. I think it was like 15 of us, techniques, hands-on, and they give you lots of lectures, etc. So I always wanted to do that course, and I found the perfect opportunity when I was in Toronto, about to finish my postdoc there. And what I found is, apart from doing something that I always wanted to do, I felt that it just solidified, like all the skills that I already had, I felt as if I was on top of them. My confidence level just raised really, really lots. And I also learned to appreciate that there were aspects that I had no idea about, and that I could start to embed myself in them. And I might not be able to master them in the same way because I didn't have another 7 years or whatever. But I could ask questions, and I could find collaborators in order to use those approaches to look at the questions that I wanted to ask in a different angle. And for example, I think that has now allowed me to find collaborators and, to have again that confidence of pointing out what gaps we might be able to fill in together.
That's super interesting, and it's funny because I didn't get to the postdoc, but of course, even as a postdoc, there's still things you can learn, things you can get better at that will then make you a better candidate later on. Of course, it totally makes sense. I just found it really, really interesting. Now, thinking of that they had that fellowship. I think Oxion is the name that you. Yeah. Then having that fellowship, what was then? Because I'm really curious at the kind of the hiring process, how it happens, the interviewing. Can you talk a little bit about how then you had to make a case that you were the person for the position that you ended up getting?
Yes, absolutely. So that was a really interesting kind of time. It's kind of putting the pieces in the right place at the right time. When we first moved from Toronto to the UK, I remember my husband asking me, do you know anybody, in the South Coast? Because I'm being offered a lectureship there. And I was in a position to find a postdoc. So I looked around at the University of Southampton for a postdoc for me, and it didn't quite fit the profile that I could offer. There wasn't a lab that was doing what I wanted to do. And so at the time I said, no, there is nothing. So that's when we went to Oxford. But then some years later, four years later, when there was this advert that they were calling for 5 interdisciplinary fellowships at the University of Southampton, and you could come in and start a new group. And that really rang the bell saying, well, I remember...
this is my opportunity.
The interests in the university definitely fit what I can do, and I can offer something that is fitting there, electrophysiology in brain. And then I applied. The only thing there at the moment is when I saw that advert, I was about 25 weeks pregnant. And so with my second child. And so I thought, I could have taken the option and said, well, at the interview time, I'm going to be 32 weeks and I won't be able to take the job. But I made a phone call and I spoke with one of the senior academics, and the person said, apply. You don't lose anything by applying. I'm aware of what you are saying. Just apply. And I got invited for an interview. And in fact, the interview was when I was 32 weeks pregnant. And when they asked me, they were asking this question to all the candidates. They asked me, so if we offered you the job today, would you take it? And so I was very upfront and I said, well, for obvious reasons, I couldn't take it starting straight away. But all in all, would you be prepared to wait for me for a year? Because I would have to take my maternity leave and then I need to be back in Oxford for 3 months. But the nice thing is that my husband is also being offered a job in the area. So we are planning to make a move here. And I would be delighted to take it if that was the case. And so they offered it to me. So if the one thing that I can, pass on to the new generations there is don't let that stop you. Don't let being pregnant or having plans or anything like that stop you from making these applications, because you never know.
Yeah. And in your case, the feeling I get is this was a really great fit for you, and you were a really great fit for the position. So it would have been a pity to miss that opportunity because of this. So you were just upfront. You said things as they were, and they said, you know what, we'll wait for you. That's what happened. That's awesome.
And also I think because it was like a strategic move in which they were hiring 5 people. They were all going to have slightly different schedules. I think that having one person that was starting a little bit later, it was not a big deal. And so it was one of those situations where everything just aligns perfectly, but you need to have the right skills and the right mindset for that.
And then once you had your child, 1 year later, you get to the position. What was the position? Again, just so people can kind of understand what the path exactly was. And I have a follow-up question to that. What was the position that you got when you arrived? Yeah.
So the position, it was quite unique for the UK, because in the UK, normally you don't get these tenure track positions, but that's what it was. Essentially, I was going to have the first couple of years very light on teaching. Then it was going to build up so that eventually by the end of the 5 years, I would be a member, full member of academic staff that would have a balanced pathway of 40% research, 40% teaching, and 20% admin. And so it was, I had some lab space given to me. The first year, it was very much applying for funding. And then later on, it was, having to give some lectures or taking students and so on. So it got, that academic workload that everybody is a bit more used to.
And so my follow-up question is, now it's kind of, the dream kind of comes true at this moment, right?
Yeah.
You got the position that you had aimed for a huge chunk of your life. Was there any fear? Was there any anxiety of, being, Mariana now in this new place with new colleagues around you? Some arrived earlier, some have been here for a while, and now I'm a professor. How was that transition into this new reality, into the kind of the crystallization of all these years of work, of planning, and of envisioning something?
I think for me the biggest transition has been kind of in terms of the mindset of what the academic job is. So, when you are dreaming of I want to be an academic, I want to be a researcher, of course the dream is I want to have 100% of time to research in my lab that is going to be super well funded with a big group of people. Now, the reality is, and that took me a while to process, but I now embrace it fully, is that your academic job at the university is funded because of the undergraduate students, because of the master's students. So you have to respond to that, and you're going to have quite a heavy workload in teaching and in tutoring and so on. And that workload is going to be quite heavy during term time. And then outside that, then you need to do your research and so on. And when you want to fit as much research that you want to do in that very compressed time, you then you can hit a wall and say, I cannot possibly fit all of that. I can't. And it can get a bit stressful. I did have a little bit of an anxiety episode about a few years ago, but I overcame that simply by, allocating my time and essentially just trying to be more realistic with what I can accomplish. And especially with the fact, when you are a parent, you cannot expect to be a super productive parent when you have a teething toddler at home. But things get better and, children get more independent and so on. And you get more efficient with your time. You tend to prioritize the things that are part of the job, essential to the job, and then next, the things that are important to you. So for me, it was that transition mindset of, perfect academic job with 100% of time in the lab to a more realistic, what the job is.
And another question that I have, because clearly you've moved continents, you've moved countries, and then you've been moving, and all during that time you've been developing research. It's been a lot of work to get to where you are today. And one thing we haven't mentioned still during this conversation is, in all of these changes, degrees, different stages, how, and now you even in your current position, you kind of alluded to it in the last minute, but what are your go-to strategies to maintain work-life balance, and what have they been, maybe thinking of during the PhD, later on in the postdoc, and today?
Yes, so the work-life balance. So one strategy that I think back in the PhD days, I learned it from my then boyfriend and now husband, and we keep that, is essentially to set some boundaries in terms of when to work, especially so more important now in lockdown because the where is a little bit blurry. So, for example,
definitely,
it's not that it's an absolute no to work on the weekends, but to have a kind of a rule that weekends are not for working. Weekends are to catch up with life, to enjoy, to do things for yourself, and then to keep the working week as a working week. Of course, if there are deadlines, if there are things that come up, of course we're going to use the weekends, but in a normal routine way to keep that. So my weekends are kind of sacred, and I really do decompress. I really like them, and I enjoy them. The other thing now, having a family, etc., I think is essential to keep a 50-50 share balance with partners at home.
Of course.
And, I say this, I feel really fortunate that that's my case, but it's a bit sad to have to feel fortunate because, it really should be the reality, but it's not for many people. So I think that makes a massive difference to know that, one day is your turn, the next day is their turn. And it's not like every single thing is divided half and half. We all have the things that we prefer, but on average, we definitely have share all of the activities 50%. And also, I think it's worth mentioning again that awareness that the productivity is not going to be the same all the time, to allow that to vary over, different life situations.
And another thing that we haven't talked about and that I'm curious about is, you go from being a master's to a PhD. Then you go from being a PhD to a postdoc, then from a postdoc to a lecturer. And at these transitions, were there some fears that you might have of performing well, or were there some anxiety in the transitions? And if there were, how did you deal with it?
Yes, so I think that in all of those transitions, there is always a little bit of imposter syndrome. So the imposter syndrome is, it can creep up at any time, but especially it's in those transitions that you feel that. And so for me, the imposter syndrome, that feeling of that there is something defective or that there is something weak, that something is going to find you out. So there has been for me two really important dimensions to overcome it. And the first one is quite simple. It comes from a very simple phrase, but it's really profound. And it's that thing about don't take it personal. So, when something is not, when you feel that something is not quite right in the way you are performing, to essentially just separate that personal area from academia, and to recognize that, your worth as a human being is not conditional on any of these. So it's not conditional on your papers or grants or validation from anyone. So that for me is so powerful to say, okay, this does not define me. So once I remove that fog and I say, I'm okay, then I can go quite pragmatic, quite practical, and say, okay, so is there a weakness on my skills or on my knowledge? And where is it? Let's find it. So, for example, something that it felt quite strongly when I was writing up my PhD, I felt, that my writing was really not very good. And it's not surprising. It was not on my first language. And I think I never had practice of writing such a long piece of work. And that kind of followed me a little bit. But then what I did more or less this, and I said, okay, I have a weakness in writing. And so I took courses, I had lots of feedback. I've been writing a lot, which is the best way to learn anything. And now I feel quite confident with my writing. And it's more about, what do I write about? It's now the question as opposed to can I write it? And that's how I have approached whenever I feel that there is a weakness. Then I go and address that weakness. I get the training. And as I mentioned earlier, if it's something that is so big that I just cannot conquer it in, a few months or with dedication, then I collaborate. And then I can access all of that, knowledge and expertise by communicating with a collaborator and putting my own expertise on the table. So for me, yes, the imposter syndrome has those two dimensions. And one is, to recognize that you're a valuable human being no matter what. And then, find what the weakness is in the actual performance at work.
Athletes do it all the time, right?
Exactly.
So I really love that image. Mariana, we're sadly reaching the end of the interview, but I'm really enjoying it's a very, I want to say, a very human story that you told, of going somewhere, where the language is not your first language, finding your way through, learning the ropes, getting funding to then follow your partner to the other side of the pond, coming back. I think that there's so much that the listeners will be able to take inspiration from. I'm really, really enjoying this conversation.
Me too, thank you.
But where I wanted to go is you now have students with whom you work, and they might be going through things that are similar to what you went through, but we're in a different world today. It's 2021 is at the door. It's almost coming. Can you quickly looking at what you've just told me, of the story you've just told me, and thinking of your interactions with your students, can you tell me what you're getting from them? Having the pulse on how they lives go, the problems they go through, be it personal or just academic. Can you kind of draw some parallels, or maybe draw some parallels between what students, or I'm thinking of PhD researchers specifically, might be going through, and then think of some advice to help them in the current reality, and also in the current reality of the job market for them?
Yes, well, that's quite a complex question, but what I would say is what I observe. So I think I'm very lucky because, for example, if I look at my group right now, my PhD students are really brilliant. I learn a lot from them. They inspire me. They are very dedicated. They really work for what they want. Now, what we always discuss, in lab meetings and in journal clubs is that it is absolutely fine to always ask questions, to not be afraid of asking even what might sound as a stupid question. And then also to be able to recognize when they don't know something, that is not fine. They're not obliged to know it unless it's, their own PhD, but to allow themselves to say, I don't know, but to then go find that information. And something that I was saying to a group of new PhD students in the department, I printed this really big red L that you see in cars here when people are learning to take driving lessons. So that was to remind myself to tell them that when you hear, a podcast, or when you go to a workshop, or when you read a book, you're having all this information overload. And you're finding out facts and things of ways that you could approach your work. But the reality is that is kind of a training in progress. And it's you who has to go out there and, face the world. So imagine as if this podcast was a driving lesson, or that book you're reading is a driving lesson, or that workshop you went to is a driving lesson. But the reality is when you are out there, in the motorways of life and in the busy roads of rush hour, you will need to use all of those skills that sometimes in moments that you just need to take quick decisions, because it's just with practice that you are going to develop your own work ethic, your own way of behaving in the job market. So take everything in, but then go and do things, go and face the world, and live your dreams, essentially.
And just a question, where you are in Southampton, is there also this thing of colleges, or how are your students socializing, and how did you see them getting involved in maybe clubs on campus, or what's the parallel between what you experienced when you were in Cambridge?
Yeah. So I guess the parallel would be the clubs and societies.
Okay.
So the University of Southampton has, I can remember, but it's, 100 or more clubs and societies. And you can find anything, wine tasting, ballet, chess, you name it. And also, the biological sciences students have their own society.
Okay.
So that's a way for you to go and find like-minded people that have nothing to do with your lab. I really highly recommend that, because it really keeps you sane and it gives you perspective on life. It allows you to set those boundaries of I'm doing something different that evening or on the weekend, and to really enjoy, fun, just because.
Great. Mariana, again, so we reached the end of the interview. It's clear to me that, well, first, you love what you do, but also that you care for your students. It shows. And for me, it was a great pleasure. And I think in these last few minutes, you shared a lot of really, really great advice on how to navigate this experience of the PhD, which, like we mentioned, depending on where you are, but it's still a long large chunk of your life that you're dedicating to this one project. I really appreciate the care that I felt through seeing you on the webcam, but also talking with you. Now, the only thing that I would ask is if someone who's listening would be interested in talking with you, is there an easy way for them to reach out to you?
Yes, so they can email me. So my email, they can find it on my website, is mvc1f11@soton.ac.uk. And yeah, I would love to talk to anyone.
Perfect. Mariana, thank you so much. It's been a great pleasure. And again, I think this conversation has a lot of food for thought and a lot of inspiration for people who will be listening. So thank you. Thank you for having been so generous with your story and with your time.
Thank you so much. All the best.
And that's it for this week. Thank you for listening. And if you like the episode, if you like the show, there's different ways you can show your support. The easiest way? Share your favorite episode with a friend. And if you want to engage a little bit more, join the Papa PhD Patreon at papaphd.com/Patreon. You'll be helping me with the recurring cost of producing the show, and you'll also be helping me bring to life the improvements I have in mind for the show. Again, thanks for being a listener. Happy listening, happy sharing, and see you next week.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Papa PhD podcast. Head over to papaphd.com for show notes and for more food for thought about non-academic postgrad careers. I'll always be happy to share inspiring stories, new ideas, and useful resources here on the podcast. So make sure you subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts to always keep up with the discussion and to hear from our latest guests.